When a beat-up, rusted 1987 Honda Civic coughed and backfired its way through the employee entrance of one of the most famous sports arenas in the world, nobody expected what was about to happen next. It was a freezing November morning in Chicago. The kind of cold that slides right through your jacket like it has somewhere important to be. And Darnell Pruitt, a security guard who had stood at that same gate for 11 long years, was doing what he always did. Checking badges, drinking cold coffee, sorting the world into two neat piles, the people who mattered and the people who didn't, based on one simple thing: what they drove. So when that sad, wheezing Honda rolled into view, dented on the side, cracked across the windshield, and passenger mirror held on with 3 strips of gray duct tape, Darnell did exactly what his 11 years of habit told him to do. He laughed. Not a small laugh. Not a quiet, polite, cover-your-mouth kind of laugh. A full, loud, knee-slapping laugh that bounced off the concrete walls and floated up into the gray Chicago sky. He pointed at the car. He made a joke to his young co-worker. He was still smiling when the window rolled down. And then his whole world stopped. Because sitting in the driver's seat of that rusty, duct-taped, backfiring Honda Civic, wearing a plain gray hoodie with no jewelry, no watch, no sunglasses, was a man whose face Darnell recognized exactly 1 second after the laugh had already escaped. 1 full, irreversible, echoing second too late. The most famous basketball player who had ever lived. The man whose retired jersey number hung from the rafters 60 feet above their heads. The part owner of the very building they were both standing outside of. Michael Jordan had heard every single word. He didn't yell. He didn't reach for his phone. He didn't point back or demand to speak to a manager. He just looked at Darnell with calm, quiet eyes that somehow said everything without saying anything at all. Then he spoke 3 words. "Have a good day." And he drove forward, parked in a regular numbered space like any ordinary person, nodded to a janitor near the side door, and walked inside. Gone. Darnell stood frozen at the gate. His clipboard felt like it weighed 40 pounds. His coffee had gone cold, and something deep inside him, something he hadn't even known was fragile until this exact moment, had just cracked wide open. But here is the thing. The laugh was not even close to the most important thing that happened that day. Because what Darnell did not know yet, what nobody at that gate knew, was that inside that building, something had already been set in motion. Something that had started long before this cold November morning and involved a dead man's car, a 12-year-old girl with a basketball keychain, a 19-year story of loyalty that never once asked for applause, and a secret that had been quietly ticking like a clock behind a wall, waiting for exactly this day to finally go off. And it was all waiting for Darnell Pruitt at the executive entrance. What was there would not just change his morning. It would change the entire direction of his life. But watch this video all the way to the end, because what happens next at that executive entrance is something nobody saw coming. And once you hear the full story, you will never look at a beat-up car the same way again. The morning was cold enough to hurt. The kind of cold that slides right through your jacket, like it has somewhere to be. The kind that turns your breath into little clouds that disappear before you can watch them go. November in Chicago doesn't ask permission. It just arrives, heavy and gray, and sits down like it owns the place. Darnell Pruitt pulled his collar up and stamped his boots against the concrete floor of the employee entrance. 6:58 in the morning. 2 minutes before his shift officially started. His coffee thermos was in his left hand. His clipboard was in his right. He had stood at this exact gate, In this exact spot, through 4 different building managers, 2 championship banners, and 1 global pandemic. 11 years. He knew this gate the way a man knows the inside of his own home. He knew which hinge squeaked. He knew which badge reader was slow. He knew that the delivery trucks always came too wide on the left and had to back up and try again. He knew the names of every person who walked through. The janitors, the equipment staff, the coaches, the media people who always looked slightly lost. Darnell Pruitt knew everything about this gate, which is why he noticed the car immediately. It appeared at the far end of the entrance road, moving slowly. Too slowly. Like it wasn't fully sure it was supposed to be here. And the sound it made, Lord, the sound. A low, unhappy rattling, followed by a cough from the exhaust pipe. He's followed by a backfire so loud that Darnell's 19-year-old co-worker, Marcus Webb, actually flinched and grabbed the gate rail. "What in the world?" Marcus said quietly. The car limped forward into the light. It was a 1987 Honda Civic, the color of old dishwater. The left rear panel had a dent the size of a football. The front windshield wore a crack that ran from the bottom corner all the way to the center, like a lightning bolt frozen in glass. The passenger mirror was not so much attached as it was committed to staying. 3 thick strips of gray duct tape holding it at an angle that was almost correct. Almost. On the bumper, a white sticker read, "God is good." All the time. Darnell stared. Then he made his mistake. He laughed. Not a small, polite, under-his-breath kind of laugh. A real one. A loud, shoulder-shaking, knee-slapping laugh that bounced off the concrete walls and floated up into the gray Chicago sky. "Marcus," he said, wiping his eye, pointing at the car with his whole hand. "Whoever is driving that thing took a serious wrong turn this morning. This ain't the junkyard, brother." Marcus gave a short, uncomfortable smile. Something about the moment felt wrong to him in a way he couldn't name yet. Like that feeling you get right before you realize you've said something you cannot take back. The Honda wheezed to a stop. The window came down. The motor that controlled it groaned like it was being asked to do something unreasonable. And in the driver's seat, wearing a plain gray hoodie with the hood down, no watch, no chain, no sunglasses, sat a man whose face arrived in Darnell's brain exactly 1 second after the laugh had already escaped. 1 full, irreversible, echoing second too late. Michael Jordan. 6 championships, 5 MVPs, the most famous athlete on the planet, part owner of this building, the man whose retired jersey number hung from the rafters 60 feet above their heads. He was sitting in a 1987 Honda Civic, held together by duct tape and faith. And he had heard every single word. He didn't yell, he didn't reach for his phone, he didn't narrow his eyes or point back or say a single thing that Darnell could grab onto and respond to. He just looked at him. Calm. Level. With the kind of steady quiet that is somehow worse than anger. The kind that makes you feel the full weight of what you just did without anyone having to explain it to you. Then Michael Jordan said 3 words. "Have a good day." He rolled the window back up and pulled the Honda forward at the same unhurried pace it had arrived. Found a regular numbered parking space, not the executive lot, not the VIP section, not anywhere near the entrance with his name attached to the building down the street, and parked. He got out, adjusted his hoodie, nodded once to a janitor sweeping near the side door, said something that made the janitor laugh. Then he walked inside and was gone. Darnell stood at the gate. The cold air pressed against his face. The clipboard in his hand felt like it weighed 40 pounds. Marcus said nothing. And somewhere in the quiet that followed, Darnell Pruitt felt the first small crack form in something he hadn't even known was fragile. He stood at the gate for a long moment without moving. The cold kept pressing. A delivery truck rumbled past on the street behind him, but Marcus pretended to check something on his clipboard. Neither of them spoke, because sometimes silence is the only honest response to a moment that words would only make worse. Darnell took a slow sip of his coffee. It had gone cold. He had not always been a man who stood at gates. Once, and this felt like a different lifetime now, like a story someone else had told him about a person he used to know, Darnell Pruitt had been somebody. Not famous, not rich, but somebody in the way that matters most, when you are young and hungry, and absolutely certain that the world is about to open up for you like a door you've been knocking on your whole life. He grew up 6 miles from this building. South Side. A 2-bedroom apartment where the radiator knocked all winter, and the summer heat had nowhere to go. His mother, Gloria Pruitt. She worked the breakfast shift at a diner and the evening shift at a laundromat, and somehow still found the energy to be the loudest voice in the bleachers at every single one of his games. She would iron his jersey the night before every game. Every single one. Pressed it flat and hung it on the bedroom door so it was the first thing he saw in the morning. She never said much about it. She just did it, the way she did all important things. Quietly, consistently, without asking for credit. Darnell played basketball the way some people pray. Daily. Desperately. With everything he had, and then a little more. By his senior year of high school, he was averaging 24 points a game, and the college letters were arriving so regularly that Gloria started keeping them in a shoebox she labeled, in her careful handwriting, Darnell's Future. See, scouts came to his games, real ones, clipboards and sharp eyes, and conversations with his coach in the hallway after the buzzer. The world was not just opening, it was swinging wide, both arms spread, saying, "Come on through." Then came the 3rd game of his senior season. A jump shot, a bad landing. His left knee gave out beneath him with a sound he would spend years trying to forget, and never fully manage to. 3 ligaments. Surgery that went longer than expected. A recovery that stretched through what should have been his first college semester, then his second, then swallowed the whole year whole. By the time his body healed, the letters had stopped. The scouts had found other boys with working knees and untouched futures. Gloria kept the shoebox anyway. She never threw it out. It sat on the shelf in her closet until the day she died. And Darnell never once asked her to get rid of it, because some things hurt too much to bury and too much to look at directly, so you just let them sit on a shelf, and you both pretend not to notice them. He took the security job at 23 because it was steady, because it had health insurance, because the rent didn't care about his knee or his potential or the shoebox on his mother's shelf. He told himself it was temporary. He had been telling himself that for 11 years. He was not a cruel man. Anyone who knew Darnell would say that first, and say it firmly. He remembered every co-worker's birthday. He shared his lunch without being asked. He had once spent 40 minutes in his car with a young parking attendant he barely knew, just listening while she cried about something going wrong at home. He hadn't offered solutions, and he had just stayed. But somewhere in 11 years of standing at a gate, he had developed a habit so quiet and so routine that he had stopped noticing it entirely. He judged people by what they drove, not with malice, not on purpose. It had grown slowly, the way bad habits always do, one small shortcut at a time, until the shortcut becomes the road, and you forget there was ever another way to travel. Shiny car. Important person. Beat-up car. Background person. He sorted the world this way without thinking, without guilt, without ever once turning the measuring stick around and pointing it at himself. Until now. He looked out across the parking lot at the numbered space where the old Honda sat, dented and cracked and draped in morning shadow. The bumper sticker caught a pale slant of light. God is good, all the time. Soon Darnell exhaled slowly. The crack he had felt forming inside him spread just a little further. He didn't know yet what it was breaking. He didn't know yet what it was making room for. But the morning was still young, and the building behind him held more truth than he had yet been given. And somewhere inside it, walking unhurried down a familiar hallway in a gray hoodie, was a man whose 3 quiet words were already doing work that a shout never could have managed. Have a good day. Darnell stared at the gate. The gate stared back. And then, at exactly 9:27 in the morning, Rosie Delgado appeared. She came around the side of the building the way she always moved, purposefully, like someone who had already decided 3 things before most people had decided 1. She was 58 years old, built wide and solid, yet with silver-streaked hair pulled back tight and a ring of building keys on her belt that jingled softly when she walked. 17 years running operations at this building had given her a look, not unfriendly, but the kind of direct that doesn't waste time on the long way around. She stopped in front of Darnell. No good morning. No preamble. You want to know about the car? She said. It wasn't a question. It was the kind of statement that only works when someone has been watching you from a window long enough to already know the answer. Darnell opened his mouth, closed it, tried again. Ma'am, I can see it on your face. Rosie folded her arms across her chest and looked out across the parking lot toward the numbered space where the Honda sat. You've been staring at it for 20 minutes. You want to know why a man who owns part of this building drove that particular car through that particular gate this particular morning? Darnell said nothing. Because yes, that was exactly it. Rosie was quiet for a moment. The kind of quiet that means the words are coming, but they deserve a proper entrance. That car belonged to a man named Terrence Floyd, she said finally. Her voice had changed, just slightly. The direct edge softened at the corners, the way a person's voice does when they are about to say the name of someone they genuinely miss. Terrence was the equipment manager here. 19 years. Never missed a shift. Never once showed up without already knowing what needed doing before anyone told him. Mr. Jordan used to say, and I heard him say it more than once, that Terrence Floyd cared more about this program than half the men who got paid to play in it. Darnell watched her face. She was still looking at the car. 8 months ago, she continued, Terrence had a heart attack. Came out of nowhere on a Tuesday morning. He was 51 years old. She paused. He left behind a wife named Vivian and a 12-year-old daughter. They had nothing set aside. Not because Terrence was careless. Because this life is expensive, and a good salary disappears fast when you're raising a family right. A bus groaned past on the street behind them. Neither of them looked. The car ended up in the city impound lot. Some unpaid fees. Small amount, really. And the kind of small amount that is only small if you have it. Rosie finally turned and looked at Darnell directly. Vivian didn't have it. She had a daughter to feed and rent coming due, and a grief so fresh it still had edges on it. Darnell's throat was tightening in the way that happens when your body understands something before your mind finishes processing it. Mr. Jordan found out, Rosie said simply. Paid the impound fee, got the car released, drove it over to Vivian himself, and sat with the family for 2 hours. She paused again. longer this time. Then he asked if he could borrow it, just for a while. Vivian said yes. She didn't ask why. But why? Darnell said. The question came out quieter than he intended. Rosie looked back at the car, at the duct-taped mirror, but at the crack running across the windshield like a scar it had earned. He said it keeps him honest, she said. Said when you drive something like that, something that belonged to a man who gave everything and asked for nothing, you can't forget what actually matters. You can't start believing your own legend. The car won't let you. The words settled over Darnell slowly, like the first snow of the season, quiet and complete, and changing everything it touched. He never told anyone that story, Darnell said softly. It wasn't quite a question. Not once, said Rosie. Not a reporter. Not a camera. Not a single word on the internet. She uncrossed her arms and reached for her keys. Some people do good things because they want the world to know. Terrence Floyd never needed the world to know anything. And I think that's exactly why Mr. Jordan loved him. She turned and walked back toward the building, keys jingling softly against her hip. Darnell stood alone at the gate. He looked at the Honda for a long time, past the dent, past the duct tape, past the crack in the glass. He looked at it the way you look at something once you finally understand what it actually is. Not a punchline, not a curiosity, not a wrong turn into the wrong parking lot. A monument. That old, wheezing, backfiring Honda Civic was a monument to a man nobody outside this building had ever heard of. And Darnell Pruitt had laughed at it. Out loud. In front of everyone. He set his cold coffee down on the gate ledge and did not pick it up again. The rest of the morning shift passed the way time passes when your mind is somewhere else entirely. In blurred, shapeless chunks that you move through without really touching. Darnell checked badges. He waved through delivery trucks. He answered 2 questions from a lost media intern who needed directions to the press level. He did all of it correctly, professionally, without a single mistake. But he was not present for any of it. He was somewhere else. Somewhere small and uncomfortable, a place inside himself he didn't visit often because the furniture in that room was not arranged for comfort. It was the room where he kept the true version of things. The unpolished accounting of who he actually was versus who he told himself he was. He thought about his mother's shoebox. He thought about the sound of his knee. He thought about 11 years of mornings exactly like this one. The gate, the clipboard, the coffee, the quiet sorting of the world into categories based on hood ornaments and wheel rims, and he felt something he hadn't expected to feel. Not embarrassment. He had already moved through embarrassment. This was something slower and more serious. Shame. Real shame. The kind that doesn't come from being caught. The kind that comes from seeing yourself clearly, maybe for the first time in a long time, and not entirely recognizing the man looking back. At 11 o'clock, his shift ended. He clocked out, changed his jacket in the break room, walked to his own car, a 2009 Ford Focus with 140,000 miles on it and a heating system that only worked on the driver's side, and sat down behind the wheel without starting the engine. He sat for 3 full minutes. Then something moved in his chest, quiet and unstoppable. And Darnell Pruitt put both hands over his face and cried. Not loudly, not dramatically. Just a few tears that slipped out before he could organize them back into place. He caught them quickly, looked around the parking lot the way a grown man does when he has shown himself something true and isn't sure yet if the world deserves to see it too. He wiped his face with his sleeve, took one long breath. Then his phone buzzed against his thigh. A text from Marcus. 5 words that shouldn't have meant anything, but somehow meant everything. Darnell, you need to come back inside. Darnell stared at the screen. He typed, "My shift is over." The reply came fast. "I know. Just come back." He waited. Then, "Someone's asking for you," at the executive entrance. Darnell read the message once, read it again, set the phone face down on the passenger seat, and looked through the windshield at the gray November sky pressing down over the building he had just left. The building with his name on 11 years of time cards. The building where, right now, somewhere past the main corridor and around the east corner, the executive entrance waited with something he hadn't been told yet. He thought about not going back. It would have been easy. His shift was over. He was already in his car. He could start the engine and pull into traffic, and tell himself the whole strange morning was finished. But the truth is, Darnell Pruitt had never once in his life chosen easy over honest. Not really. Not when it counted. He picked up his phone. He got out of the car. He walked back toward the building, hands pushed deep into his jacket pockets, his breath rising in small white clouds that disappeared before he could watch them go, the same way they had that morning, at the start of all this, when the day had still been ordinary. The executive entrance was around the corner, out of sight. Whatever was waiting there had been waiting patiently, quietly, the way important things always wait, not rushing, not announcing itself, just existing at the end of the path until you are finally ready to walk the whole length of it. Darnell turned the corner and stopped, because what he saw at the executive entrance was something he had no category for. Something his 11 years of sorting the world into tidy columns had left him completely unprepared to process. His clipboard would have been useless here. There was no box on any form for this. But before we get to what Darnell saw, because that moment belongs to itself and deserves to arrive in its own time, there is one more thing you need to know about him. One more piece of the man that makes everything that follows land the way it should. Darnell Pruitt had a daughter. Her name was Amara. She was 9 years old, and she was, without question, the single best thing that had ever happened to him. She had his wide forehead, and her mother's quick, cutting eyes that missed nothing and forgave everything eventually. She laughed easily and loudly and without apology. She had decided at age 6, not wondered, not considered, but decided with the kind of iron certainty that most adults spend their whole lives chasing, that she was going to be a doctor. Not a maybe doctor, not a someday doctor, a real one, a specific one. Oh, she had already chosen her specialty, cardiology, because her Sunday school teacher had explained what a heart was, and Amara had gone home, looked it up, and decided that anything that complicated and that important deserved someone paying very close attention to it. She kept a notebook she had titled, in careful capital letters across the front cover, "The Doctor Notebook." Inside were diagrams she had copied from library books, questions she planned to ask real doctors one day, and drawings of organs labeled with every part she had memorized. The heart alone had 4 full pages. Darnell's ex-wife, Claudette, had full custody through the week. Darnell had Amara on weekends, and he treated those 48 hours the way a man treats the last good hours of something precious. Fully present. Nothing wasted. He took her to the library every Saturday. He cooked her favorite meal on Sunday evenings, macaroni with hot sauce, which Claudette considered a personal attack on proper nutrition. He helped her add new pages to the doctor notebook. He never once let her see the tired parts of him, the struggling parts, the parts that still sometimes woke at 3 in the morning doing the slow arithmetic of a life that hadn't gone the direction it was supposed to. He had one rule with Amara. One rule he returned to so often it had become almost a rhythm between them. a call and response, a thing she could finish before he got to the end of it. No matter what life looks like, he would tell her, the way you treat people is the only currency that never loses its value. Cars get repossessed. Jobs disappear. Knees give out. He always paused there, and she always waited. But how you treated people, that stays. That's the only thing that's fully, completely yours. She would nod, seriously, the way she nodded at the diagrams in her notebook. He had said those words so many times across so many Sunday evenings that they had become automatic, comfortable, like a coat he put on without thinking because it had always been hanging by the door. This morning, standing at the gate with his laugh still living in the cold air, he had heard himself say them. Not out loud, but in the way words you have spoken 1,000 times suddenly speak themselves back to you at full volume when the moment demands it. He had built a rule for his daughter out of something he himself had not been practicing. The coat had been hanging by the door for 11 years. He had never once worn it to work. That understanding had been sitting in his chest all morning, getting heavier with each passing hour. And now, walking back toward a building he had already clocked out of, toward an entrance he had no official reason to approach, it was the heaviest it had been all day. He thought about the doctor notebook. He thought about last weekend, when Amara had asked him, for the first time, carefully, like she had been preparing the question for a while, about his knee, the real story, not the short version he usually gave. She had wanted all of it. He had told her, everything, the sound, the scouts, the shoebox, the 11 years. She had listened without interrupting, which was not her natural tendency. When he finished, she had opened the doctor notebook to a clean page and drawn a careful diagram of a knee, the bones, the ligaments, and the places where things could break. She had labeled each part with its proper name, looked up the ones she didn't know, and then written at the bottom of the page in her careful, deliberate printing, "Pain is real. It doesn't mean it's the end." 9 years old. Darnell had stared at that sentence for a long time. He thought about it now as he rounded the corner toward the executive entrance and saw, for the first time, what was waiting for him there. Michael Jordan was standing outside, not inside the glass doors, not down a corridor or in a conference room. Outside, in the cold, in the same gray hoodie. Standing with his hands relaxed at his sides, looking like a man who had nowhere better to be, and no interest in pretending otherwise. Beside him stood a small, thin woman in a blue coat. And beside her, holding her hand with both of his own small ones, was a girl, 12 years old. Braids pulled back, a backpack that looked too large for her frame, a basketball keychain swinging from the zipper. She was looking at the ground, and something about the way she stood, the particular shape of a child carrying something adult-sized, hit Darnell Pruitt directly in the center of his chest. He stopped walking. He knew, without being told, without a name or an explanation, that this child had already lost something enormous. He recognized the posture. He had worn it once himself. That particular posture, that specific way of standing where the shoulders curve inward just slightly, not from bad habits or poor manners, but from carrying something invisible that nobody else can see, and everybody somehow senses. See, Darnell had worn it the first full year after his knee. He had worn it at his mother's funeral. He had worn it the morning Claudette sat across from him at their kitchen table and slid the separation papers across the wood without making eye contact. It was the posture of someone who had already learned, too young and too fast, that the world does not pause to ask if you are ready. He recognized it in this girl the way you recognize a song from childhood. Instantly, completely, somewhere below thought. He stood still. Michael Jordan saw him first. He didn't wave, didn't call out, just turned his head in that calm, unhurried way he had. The same way he had looked at Darnell at the gate that morning, and held eye contact for a moment that said simply, "You came back. Good." Marcus appeared at Darnell's left shoulder from somewhere behind him, slightly breathless, like he had been watching for Darnell's return from a window. "Her name is Destiny," Marcus said quietly, almost a whisper. "Destiny Floyd. That's Terrence's daughter." Darnell exhaled slowly through his nose. Of course it was. "And the woman?" he asked, though he already knew that answer too. "Vivian, the wife." Marcus paused. "She looks like she hasn't slept in 8 months, because she probably hasn't." Darnell looked at Vivian Floyd carefully. She was small, fine-boned, and slight in her blue coat, which was a good coat, but not a warm enough coat for this particular morning. She had her daughter's same dark eyes, or rather, Destiny had hers, and they were the eyes of a woman who had made a decision somewhere along the way to hold herself upright no matter the cost. Her chin was level, her back was straight, but around the edges, the slight tension in her jaw, the way her free hand gripped the strap of her purse just a little too firmly. The effort of that uprightness was visible to anyone paying attention. Darnell was paying attention. He had learned how to pay attention from a woman who ironed jerseys at midnight and kept a shoebox of letters she never talked about. He knew what quiet strength looked like when it was working very hard. One of Michael Jordan's staff members, a young woman with a lanyard and a leather folder, was speaking to Vivian in a low, professional voice. Vivian was nodding, asking a short question, nodding again. And the conversation had the careful, deliberate quality of something that had been arranged with great thoughtfulness in advance. Destiny was not part of that conversation. She stood slightly apart from her mother, backpack straps held in both hands, eyes on the ground. The basketball keychain on her zipper caught a thin slant of winter light and threw a small, brief spark that disappeared immediately. Darnell watched her for a moment. She reminded him of Amara, not in appearance, but in something more essential. A quality of mind that showed itself in stillness, a seriousness that lived behind the eyes and had been put there not by nature alone, but by circumstance, by the specific education that loss provides, whether you signed up for the class or not. Then Destiny Floyd looked up. She looked up the way children do when they feel eyes on them. Suddenly, directly, without the practiced indifference adults develop to protect themselves. She looked straight at Darnell. He didn't look away. Neither did she. For exactly 3 seconds they looked at each other across the cold concrete. A 34-year-old security guard with a cracked heart, and a 9-year-old's wisdom written on his conscience, and a 12-year-old girl with her father's job badge, probably still sitting in a drawer somewhere at home, because some things are too close to put away and too heavy to keep looking at. Then Destiny looked back down at the ground, and Michael Jordan walked over. He moved the same way he had always moved, with that particular ease that the truly great carry in their bodies, not arrogance, not performance, to just the deep physical confidence of someone who has spent decades being exactly who they are. He stopped in front of Darnell and extended his hand. Darnell shook it. The grip was firm, unhurried, the kind of handshake that is not trying to establish anything, just connect two people across a morning that had already said more than most conversations manage in a lifetime. "I'm glad you came back," Michael said. His voice was exactly as it had been at the gate, calm, level, no trace of the morning's embarrassment in it. Not for Darnell's benefit, not as a performance of graciousness, but because it genuinely appeared to not be living there. Darnell opened his mouth to apologize. He had the words ready, had been carrying them since the parking lot, polished and prepared. Michael Jordan shook his head once, small, almost imperceptible. "Not yet," that small shake said. "That's not what this moment is for." "Walk with me," he said instead. And Darnell, who had clocked out, who had already cried once, who had driven to the edge of leaving this whole day behind him and chosen instead to walk back through the cold toward something he didn't yet have a name for, fell into step beside the most famous athlete who had ever lived. They walked toward the building together. Behind them, Destiny Floyd reached up and touched the basketball keychain on her backpack zipper. Just touched it, briefly. Then she let it go. And Darnell, who had seen that small gesture from the corner of his eye, understood it the way you understand things that don't come with explanations, that sometimes letting go of something, even briefly, even just the tips of your fingers releasing a small metal keychain, is the bravest physical act a grieving person can manage on any given morning. He carried that image with him as he walked through the door. They didn't go to an office. No conference room. No leather chairs or long tables with water glasses arranged in a careful row. No assistant hovering at the edge of the conversation with a notepad and an agenda. Darnell had half expected all of that, had braced himself for the formal version of whatever this was, the version with witnesses and careful language. Instead, Michael Jordan stopped in a hallway. A regular hallway. Fluorescent lights overhead. A water fountain on the left with a small out-of-order sign taped to it. A framed black and white photograph on the right wall. The 1991 championship team, a young and electric and frozen mid-celebration, arms raised toward something they had worked their entire lives to touch. Darnell kept catching the photograph in the edges of his vision. A younger Michael, airborne, arm extended, caught at the exact apex of something extraordinary. He had to work consciously to keep his eyes on the older, quieter man standing in front of him instead. "I owe you an apology," Darnell said. He wanted to say it first. Needed to. "What I did this morning at the gate, the laughing, the pointing, that was disrespectful. And it was wrong, and it didn't matter whose car it was. It would have been wrong regardless." He had rehearsed more than that, but standing here, in this hallway, under these lights, the rehearsed version felt too polished for the moment. And so he stopped there and let the plain words do their plain work. Michael Jordan looked at him steadily. "I hear you," he said, "and I respect that." He put his hands in the front pocket of his hoodie. "But I'm not standing in this hallway to collect an apology, Darnell." The use of his name, first name, direct, no title, landed somewhere unexpected. "Then why?" Darnell asked. Michael leaned his shoulder lightly against the wall. Not casually, thoughtfully. The way a man leans when he is settling in to say something he has already decided deserves the full weight of his attention. "Because I saw your face," he said simply. "After. When you realized. And I know that face." Darnell said nothing. "I've made that face," Michael continued. "More times than I'd like to count. I've laughed at the wrong thing. No, I've dismissed people I should have studied. I've walked past somebody's whole story because I was too focused on my own to slow down and read it." He paused. "I'm not proud of those moments, but they taught me more than most of my good ones did." The hallway was very quiet. Somewhere down the corridor, a door opened and closed. Footsteps. Then nothing. "Rosie told me about Terrence," Darnell said quietly. Something moved across Michael's face at the name. Fast and genuine. There and gone. Like the spark off Destiny's keychain. "Terrence Floyd," he said, and the way he said it, both names, full and deliberate, the way you say the name of someone you refuse to let shrink into just a memory, made Darnell's chest tighten. 19 years, Darnell said. 19 years, Michael confirmed. Gee, and not one of those years where he was just showing up and going through the motions. He was present every single day. The kind of present that makes everyone around him better without him ever calling attention to it. He looked down the hallway for a moment. The kind of man you only fully understand once he's gone. And then you understand him so completely, it almost knocks you down. Darnell thought about his mother, about ironed jerseys, about a shoebox on a shelf that was never thrown away. "I bought him a new car once," Michael said then, and something shifted in his voice. A note of old, worn humor that had clearly traveled a long distance to get there. Brand new. Everything. He drove it for exactly 1 week. Darnell frowned slightly. "What happened to it?" Michael looked at him directly. "He sold it," he said. "Deet traded it in and put every dollar into his daughter's college savings account." He shook his head slowly, and the look on his face was the complicated, luminous expression of someone describing a wound that had somehow, over time, become something closer to a gift. "I was angry about it. Felt like a rejection." "What changed?" Darnell asked. Michael was quiet for just a moment. Then, "He died. And I finally understood what he had been trying to teach me all along." The words settled into the hallway like something solid, like they had weight and dimension and needed a moment to find their place on the floor between two men who were, it turned out, not so different in the ways that actually counted. Darnell didn't ask what the lesson was. He already knew that the gift was never the car, and the gift was never the money or the gesture or the grand thing done in the name of someone you love. The gift, the real one, the one that survives the person who gave it, is what you choose to do with what you have been given. Whether you spend it on yourself or whether you turn it immediately, instinctively, in the direction of someone smaller than you who needs it more. Terrence Floyd had taken a brand new car and turned it into his daughter's future, without pausing to consider whether that was the polite response. That was the lesson. Simple enough to fit in a sentence. Heavy enough to take a lifetime to fully carry. They stood in the hallway a moment longer. Then Michael Jordan straightened from the wall, and the conversation shifted in the way conversations do when the most important thing has already been said, and everything remaining is just the gentle work of landing. "How long have you been here?" Michael asked. "At this building?" 11 years, Darnell said. Michael nodded slowly, not with pity. Not with the particular brand of sympathy that embarrasses the person receiving it. Just nodding the way you nod when a number tells you something true about a person's life, and you want them to know you heard it. "You have kids?" he asked. "A daughter," Darnell said. And despite everything, the morning, the weight in his chest, the hallway, all of it, his face changed when he said it. Opened up. Became suddenly, helplessly warmer. 9 years old. She's going to be a cardiologist. She's already decided. Michael smiled. The real kind. Be the kind that starts in the eyes and arrives at the mouth a half-second later. "What's her name?" "Amara." "Amara," Michael repeated. Gave it the same fullness he had given Terrence Floyd's name. Both names. Unhurried. Darnell felt something loosen in his chest that had been pulled tight since 6:58 that morning. "Hold on to that," Michael said simply, meaning the daughter, meaning the certainty in her, meaning all of it. "Every day," Darnell said. They shook hands again, the same firm, unhurried grip as before, but different now. Fuller, somehow. The handshake of two men who had met each other more honestly the second time than the first. Michael turned and walked down the hallway toward the conference room where Vivian and Destiny were waiting. He didn't look back. He didn't need to. The conversation was complete in the way that only truly honest conversations ever are. Darnell stood alone in the hallway. He looked at the championship photograph on the wall. The young Michael, frozen mid-leap, reaching for something extraordinary. He looked at it for a long time. Then he turned and walked in the opposite direction, back toward the exit, back toward the parking lot, back toward his Ford Focus with its one-sided heating system and its 140,000 miles. He needed to be alone now. Not the bad kind of alone. Not the lonely kind. The necessary kind. The kind that comes when something important has happened inside you, and it needs quiet to finish its work properly. He pushed through the exit door. The cold hit him immediately. He barely felt it. He walked to his car, sat down, and for the second time that morning, he did not start the engine. He just sat, breathing, thinking about Terrence Floyd turning a new car into a college fund, about Destiny's hands releasing a keychain, about a man who drove a monument to work every morning and told nobody why. Then his phone buzzed. He looked down at the screen, and everything changed again. The notification on his screen was an email, not a text from Marcus, not a call from Claudette, not anything that belonged to the ordinary traffic of his ordinary day. It was an email from an address he had memorized 3 weeks ago and checked so many times since that the act of checking had become a kind of private ritual, something he did in the parking lot before his shift, in the break room at lunch, in his car before driving home. A ritual wrapped in the specific, the exhausting hope of a man who wants something badly enough to keep looking for it, but has been disappointed often enough to never say so out loud. The subject line read, Youth Athletic Development Coordinator. Next Steps. Darnell's thumb hovered over the screen. 3 weeks ago, on a Tuesday night when Amara was with Claudette, and the apartment was quiet in that particular way that quiet gets when you are alone with a decision, Darnell had done something he hadn't told a single person about. Not Marcus, not Rosie, not Claudette, who would have had opinions. Not even Amara, because hope shown to a 9-year-old becomes hope you are responsible for protecting. And he wasn't sure yet he could protect this one. He had applied for a job. The Chicago Park District had posted a new position. Youth Athletic Development Coordinator, South Side locations, 4 community centers, after-school programs focused on basketball and mentorship for kids aged 8 to 14. The salary started lower than his current pay. The hours were irregular. There was no guarantee of renewal after the first year. Every practical, sensible, bill-paying part of his brain had read the posting and said, not now, maybe someday. Not now. But a different part, older and quieter, and located somewhere below practical, somewhere closer to the place where ironed jerseys and shoeboxes lived, had read the posting and said something else entirely. This is the door. So he had written the personal statement the posting required. 6 nights. He had written it and deleted it and started again, and deleted that and started again. He had written about his mother standing in bleachers. He had written about the sound of a knee giving out. He had written about 11 years at a gate and the slow, creeping understanding that watching other people walk through doors is not the same as having somewhere to walk to yourself. He had written about Amara and the doctor notebook and the sentence she had written at the bottom of a knee diagram. pain is real. It doesn't mean it's the end. He had submitted it 14 days ago. He had heard nothing. He had been constructing the careful architecture of not caring about the outcome, building it brick by brick every morning before his shift. Because caring openly about things that might not happen is a luxury that costs more than most people on the south side of Chicago can afford to keep paying. And then this morning had happened. And somehow, between the laugh at the gate and the hallway, and Terence Floyd's name spoken with both its full syllables and a 12-year-old girl releasing a keychain, the architecture of not caring had quietly, completely collapsed. He was sitting in a cold car in a parking lot, and he cared. He cared the way his mother had cared about that shoebox, completely, helplessly, without the protection of pretending otherwise. He opened the email. He read the first paragraph. He put the phone face down on the passenger seat and stared at the windshield for a very long time. A pigeon landed on the hood of the car, looked at him briefly with its small, indifferent eye, and flew away. He picked the phone back up. He read the whole email this time, every sentence, every word, to the very last line. Would the Chicago Park District wish to invite him to a formal interview? His personal statement had been selected from over 200 applications. But that was not the part that took the breath out of him. That was not the part that made his hands begin to shake against the phone case. The last paragraph was the part. It said that his personal statement had been forwarded by a private donor who wished to remain unnamed to the program's lead funding committee. That this donor had contacted the district office personally. That the donor had described the statement as, and here the email quoted directly, the most honest account of what it means to love a community and not yet know how to serve it properly. The donor had recommended Darnell Pruitt specifically, by name. The program wanted him to begin by January. Darnell put both hands over his face. The cold pressed against the car windows. Across the parking lot, the 1987 Honda Civic sat in its numbered space, dented, cracked, held together with faith and duct tape, and the specific gravity of a good man's memory. The bumper sticker caught the pale winter light. God is good. All the time. And for the second time that day, Darnell Pruitt cried. But this time he did not wipe the tears away quickly. He did not look around to see who was watching. He put his hands down, tipped his head back against the headrest, and let every single one of them come. There is something that happens when you stop fighting yourself. When you put down the particular exhaustion of managing how you appear to a world that mostly isn't watching anyway. Something unknots. Something that has been holding its breath for a very long time. Finally exhales. It doesn't feel like weakness, the way you always fear it will. It feels, surprisingly, like the first solid ground you have stood on in longer than you can clearly remember. Darnell sat in that feeling for a long time. He let the morning move through him in order. The laugh at the gate, the Honda's broken exhaust coughing into the gray sky, 3 words spoken without anger. Rosie and her keys, and a name, Terence Floyd, delivered with the care of someone placing something precious into another person's hands. A hallway, and a championship photograph, and a man who leaned against a wall and said, "I know that face," because he had worn it himself. Goody, a 12-year-old girl looking up from the ground with her father's absence, written in the particular shape of her shoulders. And underneath all of it, quietly connecting everything to everything else, the way roots connect trees you'd never know were related from standing above the ground. A 1987 Honda Civic with a duct-taped mirror and a cracked windshield, and a bumper sticker that had been telling the truth all morning, to anyone willing to stop laughing long enough to read it. He understood now what the car was really about. It wasn't about humility, exactly, though humility lived in it. It wasn't about grief, though grief had put the keys in Michael Jordan's hand. It was about something simpler and more demanding than either of those things. It was about refusing to forget, refusing to let the distance between who you were and who you had become stretch so wide that you lost the thread back to the people and the moments and the ordinary human struggles that made you worth anything in the first place. It was about driving the cracked, backfiring, duct-taped evidence of that refusal through a public gate every morning and parking it in a numbered space where anyone could see it. Not as a statement, not as performance, just as a daily, private, non-negotiable act of remembering. Darnell thought about what his own version of that looked like. What was the thing he drove through his own gate every morning? What was he refusing to forget? Or, more honestly, what had he been forgetting? And what would it look like to stop? He thought about the gate, the clipboard, the 11 years of sorting and measuring and deciding who mattered before they had even fully arrived. He thought about a college savings account that used to be a car. He thought about Amara. He started the engine. In January, Darnell Pruitt reported to the Marcus Garvey Community Center on the South Side for his first day as Youth Athletic Development Coordinator. He arrived 20 minutes early. He stood outside the gymnasium door in his jacket and looked through the small window at the scuffed hardwood floor inside. A floor that had held 1,000 games and 1,000 children and would hold 1,000 more. He pressed his hand flat against the door. Then he pushed it open. His first program ran Tuesday and Thursday afternoons. 14 kids. Ages 9 to 13. Most of them had never held a basketball with any real intention behind it, had never thought of it as something that could be theirs, something they could build a whole interior life around. By March, he had 22. He kept one photograph on his desk. Not of a championship, not of a famous face. Just the Honda, taken on his phone that November morning in the parking lot before he knew what the day was going to mean. Slightly blurred, the bumper sticker barely legible in the pale light. He called it his reminder. His co-workers asked about it sometimes. He never gave the full story. He just said, it belonged to a good man who understood what things are actually worth. That was enough. One Thursday afternoon in late February, Amara visited the community center. Claudette dropped her at the door with the doctor notebook tucked under her arm and instructions to call when she needed picking up. She sat in the bleachers in her coat and watched her father run a passing drill with 7 kids who were working very hard at something that did not yet come naturally. She watched him correct a boy's footwork, gently, specifically, crouching down to the boy's level so the correction arrived as something given rather than taken. She watched the boy try again, and again, and then get it right, and turn around with a look of pure, unguarded joy blazing across his face like something had been switched on. Inside him, that he hadn't known had a switch. She opened the doctor notebook. She wrote for a moment, looked up, wrote again. Later, walking to Claudette's car, she showed Darnell what she had written. He stopped on the sidewalk and read it. Then he read it again. She had written in the careful, deliberate printing of someone who means every single letter. Daddy is healing things. Just not with medicine. He looked at her for a long moment. His daughter with her wide forehead and her sharp eyes, and her already decided future, and her 9-year-old understanding of things that most people spend their whole lives working up to. Neither did Terence, he said quietly. She didn't know who Terence was. Not yet. But he would tell her. He would tell her the whole story. The car, and the college fund, and the keychain, and the hallway, and all of it, when she was old enough to carry it properly. Some gifts need to be saved for the right moment. Terence Floyd had understood that better than anyone. Before you go, drop a comment right now and tell me where you are listening from. I read every single one, and it always amazes me how far these stories travel. If this story moved you even a little, if it made you think twice about what you judge, what you value, or who you might be overlooking, then do one simple thing. Hit that like button right now. It takes 1 second, and it tells the world that stories about kindness, dignity, and second chances are worth spreading. And if you believe, the way Darnell believed, the way Terence Floyd lived, that how you treat people is the only currency that never loses its value, then subscribe to this channel. Every single video we make is built on that same idea. Real stories, real people, real moments that remind us what actually matters before we forget again. And we are building something here, one story at a time, one viewer at a time, and you are part of it now. So subscribe. Share this with someone who needs to hear it today. Maybe a friend who is going through something hard. Maybe someone who forgot their own worth. Maybe just someone who could use a reminder that a cracked windshield and 3 strips of duct tape can hold more meaning than a brand new car ever could. And that video, appearing on your screen right now, go watch it next. Because that story, it might be exactly what you didn't know you needed today. Thank you for being here. Now go be somebody's Terence Floyd.